My name is Quinn Halstead. I am 68 years old, a widow, and for more than 3 decades I ran a textile workshop that grew into a small but respected company. People often describe me as quiet, reliable, the kind of woman who built her family's foundation in silence. What they do not know is how silence can sometimes hold more weight than any scream. The night it happened, the air in my dining room was heavy, almost staged. My daughter, Sloane, leaned forward with that bright smile she uses when she wants something to look effortless. "I made it especially for you, Mom," she said as she set the plate in front of me. It was chicken and mushroom sauce, my favorite. The same recipe my own mother used to make, the one I passed down to Sloane when she was young and still full of laughter. I wanted to smile back. But the moment the steam rose toward me, I felt a sting in my nose. The smell was wrong, not spoiled, not burned, but sharp and chemical, sweet in a way no sauce should ever be. My hand paused above the fork, and I felt my chest tighten. Something was off. Beside her, Derek, my son-in-law, sat hunched over his phone, thumbs scrolling with the careless rhythm of a man who believes the world will always catch him before he falls. He did not notice the hesitation in my face. Sloane did. Her eyes flickered toward me too quickly, too nervously. And that was when I knew. I did not confront her. I did not gasp. Instead, I reached for the teapot. With one smooth motion, I placed a porcelain cup in front of Derek, as if offering him tea, and in that small exchange of attention, I slid my plate in front of him. My daughter's lips parted, just slightly, as if she wanted to stop me. But she did not. She simply watched, frozen for half a second, then forced her smile back into place. The porcelain cup I set on the table was chipped at the rim. A small blue flower painted on its side had faded after decades of use. That chipped teacup belonged to my mother, then to me. It had survived moves, storms, and even the night my husband died. To anyone else, it was an old cup. To me, it was proof that fragile things can endure. I noticed it glowing in the soft kitchen light, an anchor in a storm I had not yet named. I lifted my fork, but my appetite was gone. I stirred the sauce, watching Derek take a few bites without looking up. I sipped water, heart pounding slowly but firmly, as if each beat wanted me to remember I was still alive. An hour later, the sound tore through the house, a low groan, the clatter of silverware against wood, and Derek's body folding onto the table. His phone slid from his hand and hit the floor with a dull thud. His face drained of color, his lips turned faintly purple. Sloane screamed, "Derek, Derek, wake up!" Her voice cracked, bouncing against the kitchen walls. She shook him, panic painted across her face like a mask slipping out of place. To anyone else, she would have looked like a wife in shock. To me, she looked like someone who knew exactly why her husband was collapsing. I did not move at first. My hands rested on the edge of the table, trembling but steady enough to keep me rooted. My eyes drifted back to the chipped teacup. I thought of the evenings when I poured tea for Sloane as a child, when she would lean her head on my shoulder and whisper secrets about schoolyard crushes. I thought of the times I worked until midnight so she could wear a dress I had sewn myself. And now, 3 days after she asked me for $200,000, this was the dinner she prepared especially for me. 3 days earlier, I had said no. I had looked into her binder filled with neat charts, too neat to be real, and I refused to sign away the money she claimed would double in 2 years. She had hidden her desperation behind a bright smile, but I saw the cracks. I told her I needed time, that I did not trust numbers written in the language of fantasy. She left my house cold, her husband trailing behind with words that carried more pressure than respect. Now Derek lay unconscious in my dining room, and Sloane's cries filled the air. I stood, the weight of betrayal pressing into my chest, heavier than fear, heavier than grief. My daughter had not said a word to me yet, but my instincts told me more than words ever could. As the sirens wailed in the distance, drawing closer, I whispered to myself in the silence beneath her screams. 3 days ago, she asked me for $200,000. I said no, and this is my daughter's answer. I tightened my grip around the chipped teacup, the rim rough beneath my thumb. Fragile things endure. Tonight, I intended to endure too. 3 days before that dinner, before the sirens and the chipped teacup trembling in my hand, there was an afternoon that should have felt ordinary. Sunlight spilled through my kitchen window, touching the wooden table where I had laid out fresh bread and a jar of honey. It was quiet, the kind of quiet I had learned to treasure since my husband passed. That was when Sloane arrived, her binder pressed tightly against her chest like a shield. She walked in with the air of someone performing confidence, her heels clicking across my floor faster than her breath allowed. "Mom, I need to show you something," she said. Her smile stretched too wide, her eyes darting between me and the binder, as though rehearsing lines she had practiced in the mirror. I gestured for her to sit. The binder opened with a snap, releasing pages covered in charts, glossy photos, and financial projections printed on heavy paper. She spread them across my table as if unveiling a gift. The boutique is ready to expand. 2 more locations, high traffic areas, guaranteed return. All I need is $200,000. In 2 years, you'll have doubled. Her voice had that brightness I remembered from her school presentations, the kind that once made me proud. But now it rang too polished, too perfect. I looked at the pages, graphs climbing impossibly upward, sales projections with no dips or valleys, every line pointing to success as if the world had no shadows. I studied her face instead of the numbers. There, behind the painted enthusiasm, I saw a flicker, a muscle twitch at the corner of her jaw, a quick intake of breath when she thought I wasn't watching. My daughter, who once giggled when she spilled flour on the kitchen floor, now looked like a stranger reading from a script. Before I could speak, Derek entered from the living room where he had been waiting. He leaned against the doorway with his arms crossed, wearing that calm expression men sometimes mistake for authority. "Mrs. Halstead," he said, no warmth in his tone. "This is an opportunity. Families support one another. Isn't that what family is for?" His words carried the weight of obligation, not love. I felt the sting of them, as though he had laid down a command rather than a request. I met his eyes, cold, calculated, the kind of eyes that measured people not by their worth, but by what they could provide. I turned back to the binder. "Sloane," I said softly, "these numbers are very neat, too neat. Business is never this clean. Where are the risks? Where are the setbacks?" She bristled, her voice rising half a pitch. "Mom, I've been preparing this for months. You don't trust me? You think I can't handle it?" I closed the binder gently. My hands were steady, though my heart ached. I've lived long enough to know when numbers are dressed up like a costume. I built my business with nothing but fabric scraps and sleepless nights. I know when a projection is only paper, not reality, and I know when desperation is hiding behind a smile. Her eyes flashed with hurt, or maybe anger. Derek stepped forward, his tone sharper this time. "At least consider part of it. A gesture of support. Sloane deserves that much from her own mother." I sat back in my chair, hearing echoes of my past. The nights when I stayed up sewing until dawn just to keep food on the table. The mornings when I balanced bills with coins, stretching dollars thin enough to tear. I had carried a family on my shoulders without anyone handing me a binder full of promises. I had survived by seeing truth where others wanted me to see illusions. Inside, my thoughts whispered like a steady drum. I know when numbers lie. I know when smiles are masks. I know when love has been twisted into leverage. I reached for the chipped teacup on the counter, poured myself tea, and let the silence settle between us. Silence can say no more firmly than words. But Sloane did not hear it. She leaned across the table, her voice cracking. "Mom, please, this is our chance. If you don't help me, everything I've worked for could collapse." There it was, the fracture, the desperation beneath the polish. I felt the room grow colder. I wanted to reach across, to hold her hands the way I once did when she was a child afraid of storms. Instead, I looked down at the faded blue flower on my cup and thought, storms pass, but they also reveal what cannot stand. I finally spoke, calm but unshakable. "I need more time. I cannot agree to this now." Her face hardened, the smile vanishing like a curtain pulled away. Derek exhaled sharply, his disapproval heavy in the room. That was the moment I knew something had shifted. My refusal was not just a decision, it was a spark. What I did not know then was how quickly that spark would set fire to everything I thought I understood about my daughter, about family, and about trust. That night, I could not sleep. The house was still, but my mind refused to rest. I sat at the kitchen table long after Sloan and Derek had gone, the binder of projections closed but not forgotten. My hands reached for something else, something older than numbers and graphs. It was a recipe card, yellowed with age, written in my mother's careful handwriting. Mushroom sauce, the same sauce Sloan had claimed as my favorite. I traced the faded ink with my fingertip, remembering the nights my mother cooked while I did homework at this very table. That card had survived moves, storms, and grief. It reminded me that truth, like ink pressed into paper, endures. I poured myself tea, the chipped blue cup warm in my hand. Outside, the branches scratched against the window as if warning me not to ignore what I already knew. The binder had been too perfect, Sloane's smile too forced, Derek's words too sharp. Something was hiding behind the presentation. I reached for the phone and dialed a number I had trusted for years. "Mr. Kaplan," I said softly when he answered. "I need you to look into Sloane's boutique. Quietly. Something doesn't add up." There was a pause, then his steady voice. "Of course, Mrs. Halstead. Give me 2 days." When I hung up, the silence returned, thicker now. I held the recipe card again and thought about the irony. My daughter wanted money in the name of expansion, but all I could see was collapse. Memories stirred like dust in an old attic. I was 25 again, newly married, with a husband who believed risk was the same as courage. He once placed papers in front of me, loan applications I did not understand, his voice full of charm and urgency. "It's just for a short time," he said. "Sign here. We need this to get ahead." I had signed then, young and trusting, my stomach tight with fear. Months later, I found myself sewing day and night to cover the debts he had hidden. I remember kneeling on the floor of our bedroom, coins scattered around me, trying to stretch them into rent. I remember the exhaustion, the shame of asking neighbors for help, the taste of bitterness when he promised again and again that next time would be different. But it never was. He died too soon, leaving me with bills and responsibility and a daughter who needed stability. I survived not because I signed papers, but because I finally refused to. I built my workshop with the scraps he left behind. I learned to turn fabric into wages, determination into shelter. So when Sloane sat across from me with her glossy binder and desperate eyes, I saw not opportunity, but echoes. My daughter's plea was not new. It was the same melody sung by her father decades earlier, only dressed in modern fonts and neat projections. The clock ticked past midnight. My body ached for rest, but I sat awake, the recipe card pressed between my palms like a prayer. In my heart, I spoke words I had never said aloud. Sometimes love is not opening the purse. Sometimes love is keeping it closed. I knew she would see my refusal as betrayal. She would call me cold, selfish, maybe even cruel. But I also knew the truth. Giving her money would not save her. It would bury her deeper in illusions. Real love required the harder choice, the one that looked like rejection, but was in fact protection. At dawn, Mr. Kaplan called back sooner than I expected. His voice was heavy. "Quinn, the boutique is not growing. It's drowning. Unpaid suppliers, back rent, debts stacking high, and Derek," he hesitated. "Derek has gambling markers, not small ones. He owes it to people who will not wait politely." I closed my eyes, my grip tightening around the receiver. The air in the kitchen grew colder. My daughter's polished binder had been a mask. Behind it was not ambition, but desperation. Behind it was danger. I set the phone down gently and lifted the chipped teacup to my lips. The tea was cold now, bitter on my tongue, but it steadied me. My instincts had been right, and though the knowledge broke something inside me, it also gave me strength. As the sun rose, washing the kitchen in pale light, I whispered into the quiet, "I have carried burdens before. I will not carry lies." I folded the recipe card, slid it back into its box, and prepared myself. Whatever storm was coming, I had weathered worse. The night of the dinner arrived with a kind of artificial calm. My dining room, which usually felt warm and simple, looked staged, as if someone had tried to paint a picture of family harmony. Candles flickered in glass holders I had not used in years, their light casting long shadows against the walls. The table was set with my best china, the ones I kept for holidays, though no holiday had been mentioned. A bottle of wine was already open, breathing in the center. Sloane moved quickly between the kitchen and the table, her smile glued in place, her laughter too sharp, too rehearsed. She set down the plates as if she were a hostess entertaining important guests, but it was only the three of us. She leaned over me and placed a plate of chicken with mushroom sauce in front of me, her voice rising in that sweet but hollow tone. "I made it especially for you, Mom." I looked at her. My daughter's face was framed by candlelight, beautiful but strained. For a moment, I saw the child she once was, beaming with pride over a drawing or a cake she had decorated. Then the memory dissolved. Now her eyes searched mine, not for approval, but for confirmation. Confirmation that I would eat what she had prepared. I lowered my gaze to the food. The sauce glistened, thick and creamy. I lifted my fork, but before it touched the plate, a scent rose up to meet me. Not the earthy fragrance of mushrooms sautéed in butter, but something sharper, sweeter, chemical. My stomach turned. It was faint, but undeniable. Derek sat across from me, hunched over his phone. He barely looked up, shoveling bread into his mouth without awareness. He did not notice Sloane watching me so intently, nor did he sense the shift in the air. I smiled softly, masking the chill running through me. I reached for the teapot at my side, steadying my hands. As I poured, I slid my plate with a practiced subtlety and replaced it with Derek's. He was too distracted to see it happen. My daughter did see. Her smile faltered, lips parting as if to speak, but she closed them again and straightened her back. She forced her expression back into place, though her eyes betrayed her. The chipped blue teacup sat by my hand, its faded flower watching like a witness. I poured the hot tea, steam curling upward, and set it gently on its saucer. The motion felt sacred, like claiming space in a room heavy with deceit. We ate in silence, or rather Derek ate. He complimented nothing, noticed nothing, his fork clattering as if the food were a chore. Sloane lifted her fork to her mouth but barely touched the food. Her eyes darted to Derek, then back to me, her breath shallow. I cut a piece from my new plate but did not raise it to my lips. Instead, I sipped tea, the taste of it grounding me in a world that suddenly felt like quicksand. Minutes passed like hours. Then it happened. Derek dropped his fork with a sharp clang. His hand clutched the edge of the table, his body stiffening. His phone slipped from his grasp, clattering onto the floor. His breath grew ragged, his skin pale. A low groan escaped his throat before his head fell forward onto the table with a heavy thud. Sloane screamed, "Derek! Derek!" Her voice rose high and shrill, echoing off the walls. She grabbed his shoulders, shaking him violently. Her face twisted in panic, but not the kind of panic born from surprise. No, this was the panic of a mask slipping, the panic of someone whose plan had spun beyond her control. I did not scream. I did not leap from my chair. Instead, I poured more tea into my cup, the sound of liquid filling porcelain louder than the chaos around me. My hand trembled slightly, but I steadied it against the rim. I raised the cup to my lips, inhaled the steam, and drank. Sloane cried, her voice breaking. "Call an ambulance! Do something!" She looked at me with wild eyes, as if begging me to join her performance. But I did not. The sirens would come soon. Neighbors would wonder about the noise. Doctors would puzzle over Derek's sudden collapse. But in that moment, silence was my answer. My silence told her I had seen through the glossy binder, through the strained smile, through the poisoned plate she had meant for me. Inside, my thoughts whispered steady and sure. Silence is not surrender. Silence is its own kind of verdict. I looked at my daughter, her face wet with tears, and felt the weight of 37 years pressing into my chest. My little girl had once clutched my hand during thunderstorms. Now she clutched her husband's limp body, her plan unraveling before her eyes. I set the teacup down, the chip rough beneath my thumb. Silence, I thought, is also an answer. The paramedics arrived within 20 minutes, their boots heavy against my hardwood floor, their voices brisk and efficient. They worked over Derek as if he were a mannequin, straps and masks and wires binding him into a fragile bundle of life. Sloane hovered beside them, her hands pressed to her face, her sobs sharp enough to pierce the air. I stood in the doorway, steady but quiet, my chipped blue teacup still on the table, cooling beside the untouched plate. They lifted Derek onto the stretcher, the wheels squeaking as they pushed him out. The red lights painted my walls in flashes. For a moment, the house looked like it was bleeding. I followed them to the porch, but I did not move further. I let the night swallow them as the ambulance pulled away. When the sirens faded, only silence remained. Sloane turned back to me, her eyes rimmed with red, her hair clinging to her damp cheeks. "Mom," she said, her voice trembling but deliberate, "what did you cook tonight? They'll need to know at the hospital." The question hung in the air, heavy with accusation disguised as concern. My heart pounded, but my voice was soft, almost tender. "I didn't cook, Sloane. You did. You made dinner, remember?" Her face blanched, her mouth opening and closing without words. For an instant, the mask slipped. Panic flickered across her features before she smoothed it back into place. "Yes, but I used your ingredients, your recipe," she stammered, searching for solid ground. I said nothing more. Silence can wound sharper than truth. I simply picked up the teacup, turning it in my hand, feeling the chip beneath my thumb. My silence told her I had noticed. My silence told her I remembered every detail. My silence told her I would not be gaslit into doubt. The tension pressed in, thick enough to choke. Sloane busied herself by straightening the already clean table, her movements frantic, unnecessary. "The doctors need answers," she continued, her voice growing louder, more desperate. "They have to know what was in the food." I met her eyes at last, calm, steady, unblinking. "Then tell them," I whispered, "because you were the one who cooked." Her lips trembled. She turned away, grabbing her bag and phone, muttering that she needed to get back to the hospital. The door slammed behind her, leaving me alone with the echoes. I stood in the kitchen, surrounded by shadows, the smell of mushroom sauce still clinging to the air. I touched the chair Derek had occupied, the plate he had eaten from, the napkin crumpled in his hand. Every object felt like evidence, though I had not yet decided for whom. The silence grew unbearable, so I walked to the sink and ran the water. My hands shook as I rinsed the teacup, watching the steam rise. I thought of my mother again, her steady hands guiding mine when I was young, teaching me that food could be love, and that love was sacred. Tonight, food had been something else entirely. A knock startled me. I froze, heart leaping. Slowly, I opened the door. There stood Marisol, my neighbor of 15 years, her robe wrapped tight around her, her dark eyes wide with concern. "Quinn?" she whispered. "I saw the ambulance. Are you all right?" I wanted to say yes, to brush it off, to protect my daughter's image even at this moment, but my lips betrayed me. "Derek collapsed," I said, my voice low. "They think it was poisoning." Marisol stepped inside without hesitation. She placed a hand on my shoulder, grounding me. "Don't be alone tonight," she said firmly. "Whatever happened here, you shouldn't face it by yourself." Her eyes swept the kitchen, lingering on the plates, the spilled wine, the jar of spices still sitting open. "Keep everything. Don't throw things away. Do you hear me? Not a crumb." Her words struck me with clarity. She was right. This was no longer just dinner. This was evidence. My daughter's smile, the chemical sweetness, the switch of plates, every detail mattered now. I nodded, too choked to speak. Together we gathered the plates and utensils, not to clean them, but to set them aside, untouched. She wrapped them carefully in towels, her movements steady and practical. "If there is truth to uncover, it will be here," she said. As she worked, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time that night, I was not carrying the weight alone. My silence was powerful, yes, but Marisol's presence was a shield I had not known I needed. When she finished, she turned to me, her expression fierce. "Quinn, I've been your neighbor for years, but tonight I am more than that. I am your witness. Whatever storm is coming, you will not face it alone." I looked at her, the gratitude too heavy to form into words. Instead, I lifted the chipped teacup between us. "This has survived everything," I whispered. "So will I." After Sloane left for the hospital, the house sat in silence except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint tick of the clock. Marisol stood at my side, her arms folded, her eyes scanning the kitchen like a nurse walking into a ward where something had gone terribly wrong. She did not rush me. She simply said, "If you are ready, let's start." We moved slowly, deliberately, as if each object could speak if only we listened closely enough. The plates were still on the table, smeared with sauce. Derek's fork bent slightly where it had fallen from his hand. I wanted to push everything away, to scrub until the air no longer smelled of mushrooms, but Marisol placed her hand over mine. "Don't touch. Not yet. Look first." I nodded. My breath trembled. I never imagined that one day I would examine my own kitchen like a crime scene, looking for proof against the daughter I once rocked to sleep. My chest tightened as I whispered inside myself, I never thought I would be investigating my own child. We began with the counters. A jar of thyme stood open, though I had not used it in weeks. Next to it, the mortar and pestle I had inherited from my mother. Its surface was streaked with something green, ground into fine dust. I touched it with the tip of a spoon, the powder clinging like pollen. My stomach turned. Marisol leaned closer, her face grim. "That isn't thyme," she murmured. She reached for a paper towel and carefully wrapped the pestle, sealing away the residue. I moved to the trash bin, my heart pounding as though I might find a body hidden inside. Instead, I found latex gloves, crumpled and stained faintly green. They smelled faintly bitter when I lifted them. I dropped them quickly, my hands shaking. Piece by piece, we uncovered what Sloane had left behind in her haste. A small cloth with streaks of dark green, a jar tucked behind the flour labeled only ground herbs in her careful handwriting. Each discovery felt like a blade, cutting through the thin hope that maybe I had misjudged her. I stopped, gripping the edge of the counter to steady myself. "She used to sit here," I said quietly, "right here, on this stool, swinging her legs while I baked bread. And now—" My voice faltered. Marisol placed a hand on my shoulder, grounding me once more. Now she has left us a truth we cannot ignore. The truth was everywhere, if I dared to see it. When the kitchen offered no more secrets, we moved into the living room. On the coffee table sat Sloane's iPad, left behind in her rush to follow Derek. The screen lit under my touch, no password set. My hand hesitated, but Marisol's voice cut through my guilt. "Quinn, if she has placed your life in danger, you have every right to know." I opened the browser. The story spilled out like a confession. Oleander symptoms in humans, how to grind toxic plants, fastest-acting natural poisons, and then, chillingly, how to fake grief convincingly. My knees gave out, and I sat heavily on the couch, the device still glowing in my lap. It was one thing to suspect, another to see the evidence typed in her own words, her curiosity carved into search bars. My chest heaved as I whispered, I never thought the day would come when my child's fingerprints would be on murder instructions. Marisol sat beside me, her voice steady but sorrowful. "This is not a misunderstanding. She planned it." I looked around the room. The framed photographs of birthdays, graduations, holidays, all the milestones of a life I thought we shared. And then the iPad in my lap, the green dust on my mother's mortar, the gloves in the trash. The contrast was unbearable. I closed my eyes, gripping the chipped teacup I had carried with me from the kitchen, its rough edge pressed into my palm, anchoring me to the moment. Silence is an answer, I reminded myself. But now silence would not be enough. Silence could no longer protect me. I turned to Marisol. "We keep everything. We record it. We do not erase a single mark." She nodded, her jaw set with quiet determination. "And we call someone you can trust, because next time, Quinn, she will not miss." The words sank deep, as heavy as stones. My daughter had left me proof, and proof demanded action. The house had settled into uneasy stillness after Marisol left for the night. I sat at the kitchen table with the evidence spread around me, the pestle wrapped in paper, the gloves sealed in a bag, the iPad glowing like a lantern of betrayal. I thought I had at least until morning before facing my daughter again, but the door slammed open and Sloane's footsteps echoed down the hallway. She appeared in the doorway, her eyes swollen from tears but sharp with suspicion. "What are you doing?" she demanded, her voice slicing through the room. "I saw the way you looked at me tonight. You think I—" She stopped, biting her lip. "You think I tried to hurt you, don't you?" I did not rise. I did not flinch. I simply folded my hands on the table, the chipped teacup beside me, the edge of it pressing into my skin. My voice was steady, though my heart thudded. "Sloane, I will be meeting with a lawyer." Her breath caught. For a moment, silence flooded the room. Then she exploded. "A lawyer? You're going to drag me into court? You would destroy your own daughter?" She stepped forward, slamming her hands on the table. "You're sick, Mom. You're paranoid. Derek collapses after dinner and suddenly you're painting me as a murderer? Do you realize what you're doing? You're tearing this family apart." Her words came fast, like arrows shot too quickly to aim. Each one hit a different part of me. Mother, widow, survivor. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe this was all madness, that I had dreamed of the powder, the gloves, the searches. But the evidence on the table glowed back at me like a cruel chorus. "I'm not destroying this family," I whispered. "I'm protecting myself. I am protecting what is left of me." Her face twisted. "Protecting yourself? From me? I am your daughter. Without me, you have no one. You'll end up old and alone in this house, whispering to your chipped teacup. Is that what you want? To die, bitter and unloved?" The cruelty of her words struck deep, but I did not move. I let the silence fill the space again. Silence was power. It pressed back against her fury like a wall she could not climb. She pulled at her hair, pacing. "Mom, if you go through with this, you'll ruin me. Do you understand? You'll ruin your only child. You're supposed to protect me, not condemn me." I felt the weight of her plea. My mind replayed nights when she cried from fevers, when I sat by her bed telling stories until she slept. I had carried her through childhood storms, believing love was enough. Now she asked me to carry her again, this time over the broken glass of her own choices. The question hung heavy inside me. Was it love to protect her from the law, or was it love to let her face it? What kind of mother turns her child over to strangers in uniforms? But then again, what kind of daughter turns poison into a plan? I stood slowly, letting the chair scrape against the floor. My voice was quiet but firm. "If I let this pass, see, Sloane, if I look away, you will not stop. You will try again. Maybe to me, maybe to someone else. I cannot close my eyes to that." Her face crumpled, but not with remorse. It was rage, pure and sharp. "You're pathetic," she spat. "You think a lawyer will save you? You think the law cares about an old woman? All you're doing is ensuring you'll die alone. And when you do, remember, it was your choice. You killed this family, not me." She grabbed her bag and stormed toward the door. The walls shook with her exit, the echo of her fury trailing behind. I stood in the kitchen, the silence rushing back like an ocean. I looked down at the iPad still glowing with her search history, the mortar with its green residue, the gloves, the letter she might as well have signed with her own hand. And then I looked at the chipped teacup. Its rough edge reminded me again, fragile things can endure. Inside, I whispered words I knew my daughter would never accept. Sometimes, love is not shielding you. Sometimes, love is letting the truth touch you, no matter how it burns. The question pressed against me like a blade. Had I just saved my daughter or destroyed her? And which wound would cut deeper? The one in her life or the one in my heart? The next morning, I walked into the office of attorney Lyle Chen, the evidence bundled carefully in a plain brown bag that felt heavier than bricks. Marisol came with me, her hand steady on my arm as though she feared I might collapse before reaching the door. The room smelled faintly of leather and ink, the shelves lined with volumes of law that looked as heavy as my heart. Mr. Chen greeted us with a quiet nod, his black suit pressed, his eyes sharp, but not unkind. He gestured for us to sit. "Mrs. Halstead, tell me everything from the beginning," he said. I opened my mouth, but my voice faltered. So it was Marisol who began, her tone even but firm. She described the dinner, Derek's collapse, the switch of plates, the residue in the mortar, the gloves in the trash, the iPad with its damning history. I watched as Attorney Chen took notes in neat, deliberate strokes, his pen never pausing. When she finished, the silence in the room stretched. I felt my hands tremble in my lap, but Marisol covered one with hers, her warmth anchoring me. Mr. Chen finally set his pen down and looked directly at me. His voice was calm, almost clinical. "Mrs. Halstead, what you are describing constitutes attempted homicide." The word struck me like a sudden storm. Attempted homicide. Cold, legal, unyielding. They stripped away the last illusion that this was simply a family crisis or a misunderstanding. My daughter had not just betrayed me, she had tried to kill me. I gripped the chipped teacup I had brought in my bag, more for comfort than for evidence. Its edge pressed into my palm, and I felt tears sting my eyes. "She is my only child," I whispered. How can I place that word on her shoulders? Homicide. Mr. Chen leaned forward, his voice steady but not unkind. "Mrs. Halstead, I understand your hesitation, but the law does not bend for family ties. If you do nothing, you place yourself in grave danger, and the danger does not end with you. A person who plans a crime this carefully will try again." His words settled in my chest like stones. I had always believed silence could shield me, that my love could somehow pull Sloane back from the edge. But now I understood silence was not safe. It was complicity. Marisol squeezed my hand, her eyes locked on mine. "Quinn, you didn't choose this." "She did. The only choice you have now is whether you protect yourself or wait for her to finish what she started." I looked at both of them, the lawyer with his pen, my neighbor with her fierce loyalty, and felt something shift. For days, I had been drifting, carried by shock and disbelief. Now, for the first time, I felt the ground beneath me solidify. Mr. Chen pulled out a set of documents. "This is the formal declaration," he explained. "It begins the process of securing a restraining order. It also preserves your right to press charges. You are not sentencing her. You are protecting yourself." The papers lay before me like a line drawn in the sand. My hand hovered above them, trembling. Memories flashed. Sloane's first steps across the living room, the way she once pressed wildflowers into my palms, the laughter that once filled this house. Then, the binder of lies, the chemical scent rising from my plate, Derek's body collapsing to the table. I took a deep breath. My voice, when it came, was low, but steady. "I never thought I would need to sign papers to defend myself from my own child. But here I am." Marisol nodded, her grip on my hand firm. "Here you are, and you're stronger than you think." I picked up the pen. For a moment, I felt the weight of 40 years pressing against my chest, the ache of every sacrifice I had made. Then I signed my name, slowly, deliberately, each letter as a declaration. When I set the pen down, the room felt different. The fear was still there, but it no longer owned me. I looked at Mr. Chen and said, "What comes next?" His eyes met mine, unwavering. "Now, Mrs. Halstead, we let the law do its work, and you take back your life." Detective Priya Rao arrived just after noon, her presence quiet but commanding. She was younger than I expected, her dark hair pulled back, her voice measured. She shook my hand firmly and introduced herself, then stepped inside with 2 officers carrying sealed bags and cameras. I led them to the kitchen, each step heavy as though I were delivering them not to a room, but to the heart of my life. The smell of last night's dinner still lingered, faint but bitter, clinging to the curtains and my memory. Detective Rao paused in the doorway, scanning the space with sharp eyes, then nodded to her team. "We'll process this as a crime scene." Her words landed like a blow. Crime scene. I sank slowly into the kitchen chair, my chipped teacup in front of me, steam no longer rising from its empty belly. This kitchen had once been a sanctuary, the place where my daughter's laughter had echoed as she licked frosting from a spoon, the place where I stitched hems at midnight while bills piled on the counter. And now, in the mouth of law, it was reduced to evidence tags and photographs. The warmest room in my life had become a legal file. The officers moved with careful precision. One photographed Derek's abandoned plate, the sauce dried at its edges. Another bent over the mortar and pestle, lifting it gently into a sterile bag. The latex gloves from the trash were sealed, labeled, and taken away. Every object was tagged, its history rewritten from memory into evidence. I clasped my hands together, trying to stop their trembling. Detective Rao sat across from me, her notepad open, her pen poised. "Mrs. Halstead," she said softly, "I'll need you to walk me through last night. Every detail matters. What you ate, what you smelled, what you saw." So I told her. My voice was steady at first, then cracked as I described the strange sweetness rising from the plate, my decision to switch dishes with Derek, the moment his body crumpled against the table. I saw it again as I spoke, the sound of his fork clattering, Sloane's scream, my own silence holding me upright like scaffolding. Detective Rao nodded, never rushing me, never doubting. She wrote quickly, but her eyes stayed on mine. "You did the right thing," she said finally. "Your instincts likely saved your life." The words gave me little comfort. Saving my life meant condemning my daughters, and the weight of that truth pressed against my chest until breathing felt like labor. I wrapped my hands around the teacup, pressing the chip into my skin, reminding myself I was still here, still whole. The officers opened Sloane's iPad next, scrolling carefully through the search history. Detective Rao's face hardened as she read, "Oleander, poisoning. Staging grief." She looked up at me, her eyes sharp but filled with quiet compassion. "This is conclusive, Mrs. Halstead. It's not speculation. This is attempted homicide." I flinched at the word again. Homicide. Hearing it spoken aloud inside my kitchen made the walls close in. My daughter's name might one day be printed beside that word in black and white ink. I closed my eyes, whispering silently, "How did we come here?" Outside, the late sun cast golden light through the lace curtains. It was the same light that had once warmed birthday cakes and Sunday breakfasts. Now it illuminated gloved hands lifting my life into plastic bags. When the officers left to load the evidence into their car, Detective Rao remained. She leaned forward, folding her hands. "Mrs. Halstead, I know this is unbearable, but please understand, without your courage, without your silence last night, we'd be investigating a very different case today. We would be here for your funeral." Her words struck me with a truth I wanted to deny but could not. My silence, once mistaken for weakness, had been the one thing that kept me alive. I nodded slowly, forcing myself to breathe. "Detective, will this house always carry that word now? Crime scene?" She paused before answering. "For now, yes. But one day it will be your home again. Evidence will leave. Paperwork will file away. What remains will be yours to reclaim." When she left, I stayed seated in the same chair, the hum of the refrigerator steady, the tick of the clock relentless. My eyes roamed across the bare counters where utensils had stood, now stripped away. The kitchen felt hollow, emptied of warmth. I whispered into the quiet, "Once, this room held love. Tonight it holds law." And I wondered if I would ever again taste bread or tea without feeling the shadow of poison in the air. I asked Sloane to come back to the house. The request was simple, delivered in a voice that gave nothing away. She arrived just before dusk, her steps sharp against the porch, her face set with something between defiance and desperation. When she walked into the kitchen, her eyes darted to the bare counters, the empty spaces where the mortar, the gloves, and the iPad had once been. She knew immediately that things had shifted. She did not sit. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed tightly, her breath uneven. "Mom, listen to me," she began, her voice trembling at the edges. "You don't want to do this. If you go through with it, if you tell them everything, you'll lose me. You'll lose your daughter. And once you do, you'll have nothing left." Her words carried both plea and threat, a tangled rope meant to bind me. I stayed seated at the table, my chipped teacup before me. I lifted it gently, placed it at the center of the wood, and slid it forward until it sat between us. The sound of porcelain against oak was louder than any reply I could have given. She flinched at the gesture, her voice rising. "Don't you understand? They'll drag me through court. They'll plaster my name in papers. They'll tear apart our family, what's left of it. And you'll sit there and let them? You'll let them destroy your own blood?" Her words sliced the air, but I said nothing. Silence pressed between us, heavy as stone. She stepped closer, her hands shaking. "Mom, I was desperate. Derek, he owes people you can't imagine. If you tell the police, if you testify, they'll come after me too. Do you want that on your conscience? Do you want to know you killed your daughter by letting them lock me away?" Her voice cracked, her tears finally spilling. For a moment, I saw the child she once was, clinging to me during storms, whispering that she was scared. But then I remembered the smell rising from my plate, the green dust in my mother's mortar, the search history glowing in the dark. I breathed slowly, my fingers brushing the rim of the teacup. My silence was not a weakness. It was a decision. Sloane slammed her hand on the table, rattling the cup. "Say something. Don't just sit there with that stupid cup. Tell me you're not going to ruin everything." But I would not be pulled into her storm. I let her words hang, unanswered, each echo carving deeper into the walls. The quiet between us grew sharper than knives. Finally, her voice dropped, low and menacing. "If you go through with this, you'll lose everything. Your company, your reputation, me. Do you really want to be that old woman sitting alone drinking from a broken cup with no one left to love you?" I lifted the teacup once more, the chip catching light in the fading sun. I held it steady in my hands, then set it down with care. That was my answer. Her breath hitched. She stared at me, realization dawning that silence itself could be final. No argument, no plea, no threat could bend it. Her face hardened. "Fine," she spat. "If you won't protect me, then you're not my mother anymore." She turned sharply, her footsteps pounding down the hall, the door slamming so hard the walls shook. I remained where I was, the quiet pouring back into the room like water through cracks. I reached for the cup, tracing the chip with my thumb, the edge rough but familiar. Inside, my thoughts whispered, "This silence is not emptiness. It is a boundary. It is a verdict." I stayed at the table until the light outside dimmed into night, knowing that in refusing to answer her with words, I had spoken louder than ever before. The courthouse felt nothing like the warm wood of my kitchen or the soft carpets of my living room. It was cold, impersonal, washed in fluorescent light that buzzed overhead. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and old paper. I sat in the front row of the courtroom, my hands folded tightly in my lap, the chipped teacup I had carried for weeks left at home. Today, there would be no talismans, only the truth. When the bailiff called the case, the doors at the side opened and Sloane was led in. My breath caught. She wore an orange jumpsuit, her wrists cuffed, her shoulders slumped under the weight of chains that clinked with each step. For a moment, I saw the little girl who once tugged at my apron asking for cookies. But when her eyes found mine, they burned not with sorrow or regret, but with hatred. She glared at me as though I had betrayed her, as though it were I who had poisoned her plate instead of the other way around. The hatred in her stare was sharper than any knife. I held it steady, refusing to flinch. The judge entered, an older man with weary eyes. The gavel struck once, the sound sharp, final. It echoed in my chest like the crack of ice. "Court is now in session," the clerk announced, her voice flat and practiced. The prosecutor rose, presenting the evidence methodically, the mortar and pestle streaked with green dust, the gloves pulled from my trash, the iPad glowing with searches about oleander and feigned grief. Each item was shown, labeled, entered into record. The photographs of Derek collapsing at my kitchen table were displayed like some grim tableau, his lips tinted purple, Sloane's face contorted in feigned panic. Through it all, I sat still. My heart thudded, but I refused to let tears rise. This was not the place for tears. When Sloane's defense attorney rose, his arguments felt thin, desperate. He painted her as overwhelmed, manipulated by debt, pressured by Derek's recklessness. He called her a devoted daughter who made a mistake out of fear. I almost laughed at the word mistake. A mistake is leaving bread too long in the oven. A mistake is forgetting a birthday card, grinding poison into dust, stirring it into sauce, switching smiles for masks. Those are not mistakes. The judge listened, expression unreadable. The prosecutor's words, cold and precise, followed. This was a premeditated, attempted homicide. The victim only survived because she trusted her instincts and switched the plates. This was not fear. This was a calculation. The word homicide rang out, heavy, inescapable. Sloane winced, then snapped her head toward me. Our eyes locked again. She mouthed a single word I read clearly. Traitor. I breathed in deeply, steadying myself against the urge to cry, to scream, to defend myself against her silent accusation. But I said nothing. Silence was my shield, my power. The judge cleared his throat, his voice cutting through the tension. Given the severity of the evidence, the charges of attempted murder and conspiracy will proceed to trial. Bail is denied. The gavel came down again, 3 sharp strikes. The sound seemed to shatter whatever illusions remained between mother and daughter. Sloane erupted, her voice breaking. "Mom, you can't do this. I'm your daughter. You'll regret this for the rest of your life." The deputies restrained her as she thrashed, her eyes wild, her voice cracking into screams. I did not move. I sat still, my back straight, my eyes forward. No tears, no collapse. My silence answered her louder than words ever could. As they led her away, her screams echoed down the sterile hallway until they faded into nothing. The room grew quiet again, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the smell of dust and disinfectant heavy in the air. I sat for a long time even after the judge dismissed us. My body felt carved from stone, my soul trembling beneath the surface. The woman in the orange jumpsuit was my daughter, yet she was also a stranger, someone who had weighed my life against her debts and found me expendable. When I finally rose to leave, Marisol was waiting outside the courtroom doors. She took my hand without a word, her presence steady. I looked down the hallway where Sloane had been taken, and I realized something with piercing clarity. I had not lost my daughter today. I had lost her long before, the moment she chose poison over truth. Today was only the unveiling. And though the courthouse was cold, though the gavel still echoed in my ears, I felt no tears come. Just silence, as sharp as a blade, cutting through the remnants of denial. When the judge allowed me to deliver a victim impact statement, I felt the weight of every year I had lived pressing on my shoulders. The courtroom was silent as I walked to the podium, the air heavy, the fluorescent lights humming above. Sloane sat at the defense table in her orange jumpsuit, her hair tangled, her eyes hollow but still burning with something sharp. I did not look at her at first. Instead, I unfolded my paper, though I knew I would not need to read from it. These words had lived in me too long. I cleared my throat, my voice steady though my hands trembled slightly. My name is Quinn Halstead. I am 69 years old. I am a widow, a mother, and until recently, I believed I was the foundation of a family that still had meaning. I paused, my eyes drifting to the chipped teacup resting in my purse on the bench behind me. It was not evidence, only memory, but it gave me strength. When Sloane was a little girl, she was afraid of storms, I continued. The thunder would rattle the windows, and she would come running down the hallway in her pajamas, tears on her face. I would sit her at the kitchen table, pour warm tea into a cup that once belonged to my mother, and tell her, "Drink, my love, drink, and we'll get through the storm together. I felt the courtroom shift, the silence deepening. The memory was as clear as if it had happened yesterday, her small hands wrapped around the cup, her shoulders trembling until the tea calmed her, until my words soothed the fear. "That cup still sits in my kitchen," I said softly. "It has a chip along the rim now. It has survived decades of washing, years of use, and every storm we faced together. It has endured more than I thought possible. I suppose I have, too." My eyes lifted, finally meeting Sloane's. Her face was unreadable, but I pressed on. 3 days before the dinner that nearly ended my life, my daughter sat across from me with papers full of numbers and promises. She asked me for $300,000. When I said no, she smiled as though she understood. But that smile was only a mask. Behind it, she was already planning my death. She put poison where love used to be. She turned our family table into a trap. My voice tightened, but I forced myself to continue. "I will not weep here. Not in front of this court. Not for her. I have no tears left to spend on a daughter who measured my life against her debts and decided money mattered more. But I will speak the truth. Her actions destroyed something that cannot be rebuilt." I looked briefly at the judge, then back at Sloane. When I told her as a child, "Drink and we'll get through the storm together," I believed it with all my heart. I believed storms were temporary. But this storm, this betrayal, is different, because this time I must face it alone. The echo of my words settled into the room like falling rain. My hands gripped the podium, steady now. I ask this court for protection. I ask that she not be allowed to contact me. No letters, no phone calls. No more chances to wound me with words or poison. I cannot survive another storm of her making. I drew in a long breath, feeling the finality of the moment. I will drink from that chipped teacup again. I will sit in my kitchen, in my home, and I will live. But when the rain comes, I will whisper to myself, "Quinn, you will get through the storm." And I will not add the words I once promised her, because now I will get through it alone. I stepped back from the podium, my heart hammering, but my face calm. I did not glance again at my daughter as I returned to my seat. The silence in the courtroom was thick, not broken until the gavel sounded once more. A week after the victim impact statement, I sat in Attorney Chen's office once again. The blinds were half drawn, slicing sunlight into thin lines across the leather chairs. Marisol sat beside me, her hand resting lightly on mine. I thought we had already uncovered every secret, already endured every revelation, but the look on Mr. Chen's face told me there was more. He folded his hands on the desk and leaned forward. "Mrs. Halstead, I need to share new findings from the district attorney's investigation. These may be difficult to hear." I braced myself, though my heart still stumbled in its rhythm. "Go on," I said quietly. He opened a folder and slid a page toward me. 2 years ago, your daughter's mother-in-law suffered a fall down a flight of stairs. It was ruled accidental at the time, but new testimony suggests Sloane may have orchestrated it. She stood to benefit from an insurance payout. The words seemed to drain the air from the room. I remembered that fall vaguely. Derek's mother in a cast, Sloane showing up at my house with a story about bad luck and hospital bills. I had even sent flowers. The thought that my daughter might have pushed her for money made my stomach twist. "There's more," Mr. Chen continued gently. He pulled out another document, his voice even, deliberate. "We've learned that several elderly neighbors reported missing funds after Sloane offered to run errands or help with groceries. At the time, they said nothing, thinking they had miscounted or forgotten. But now, with context, a pattern emerges." I closed my eyes, fighting the sting of betrayal anew. My daughter, my only child, hadn't just plotted against me. She had been walking this path of deceit for years, long before oleander leaves and poison sauce. Marisol's grip tightened. "Quinn," she whispered, "don't take this on yourself." But guilt spread through me like wildfire. Had I failed to see the signs? Had my love blinded me so completely that I mistook cunning for charm, excuses for accidents? I thought of the chipped teacup, the storms we had weathered, Perhaps those storms had never been storms at all, only disguises for what she was becoming. Mr. Chen's voice broke through my thoughts. The prosecution intends to use these incidents to establish a pattern of behavior. It will strengthen their case. I nodded numbly. So it isn't just me, I murmured. She has been hurting others too. The moral weight of it pressed hard. If I chose silence, if I walked away, how many more would she have deceived, injured, ruined? And yet, she was my daughter. The child who once clung to me during thunder, the girl who once laughed in my kitchen. Was it my role now to condemn her fully? Marisol spoke, her voice steady. Quinn, she crossed a line the moment she put poison in your food. These truths don't change what she did. They only show who she's been for longer than you knew. Her words cut through my fog, but the conflict still burned in me. Could forgiveness live beside justice? Could love survive when it was shattered by crime after crime? I thought of the neighbors who trusted her with their money, of Derek's mother who may have suffered at her hands. If I forgave her without consequence, I was betraying them as well. Forgiveness, I realized, could not mean freedom from accountability. My voice shook but grew stronger with each word. All my life I taught her that storms could be endured with love, but she chose to become the storm, and now I must protect myself and others from her path. Forgiveness may live in my heart one day, but it will not shield her from justice. The silence that followed was heavy, but different, not despairing. Silence, not the silence of shock. It was the silence of acceptance, the sound of truth settling into place. Mr. Chen closed the folder gently. That clarity will carry you through what's next, Mrs. Halstead. The trial will be long, but you are no longer standing in the shadows of what you didn't know. You see her fully now. I looked out the window, where sunlight cut across the floor. For the first time in weeks, I felt that light touched me without sting. My daughter's path was darker than I could have imagined, but mine did not have to be. When the trial dates were set and the lawyers no longer called every day, I found myself staring at the walls of my house with a kind of exhaustion that no sleep could fix. The place was filled with memories, but not all of them were kind. Every corner whispered of betrayal now. The kitchen, once alive with family meals, would forever carry the echo of Derek's body collapsing against the table. I knew I could not stay there. So I made the decision that startled even me. I sold the company. The textile business I had built stitch by stitch after my husband's death, the empire that once defined me, was handed over to a corporation that had been circling for years. The check they wrote was more than I could ever spend in a lifetime, but money had never been the point. What I bought at that moment was freedom. With part of the proceeds, I purchased a small house just 3 blocks from Marisol's. It was modest, white shutters, a narrow porch, a garden in need of care. But it was enough. Enough for one woman, enough for peace. The first time I turned the key, I felt a weight lift. No grand staircase, no heavy drapes, no shadows of betrayal, just walls waiting to hold new memories. Marisol helped me move in. She carried boxes with the energy of someone half her age, laughing as we tried to decide where my bookshelves should go. Her presence filled the rooms with warmth. "You don't need a mansion," she said, setting down a box of old teacups. "You need a place where you can breathe." She was right. Breathing came easier here. In the weeks that followed, I joined a support group. Parents, grandparents, siblings, people whose love had been twisted, used, or stolen by those they trusted most. We met in the basement of a community center, the smell of coffee and faint mildew mixing in the air. At first, I only listened. Stories spilled from their mouths. Children draining bank accounts, nieces forging signatures, sons selling heirlooms for gambling debts. Each tale was like a shard of my own. When I finally spoke, my voice was quieter than I expected. "My daughter tried to poison me," I said. A murmur rippled across the circle, but no one gasped. No one looked at me with judgment. Instead, a man with silver hair nodded solemnly and said, "Mine nearly burned the house down for insurance money." In that circle, I was not a spectacle. I was not alone. I began to go every week. Slowly, my words carried less shame and more clarity. We were not defined by the betrayals we endured. We were defined by the ways we chose to stand afterward. At home, I reclaimed small rituals. I unpacked my mother's recipe cards and set them neatly in a wooden box on the counter. I brewed tea in the chipped cup, not as a reminder of storms past, but as a quiet promise to myself. One afternoon, I bought a tray of herbs from the market: basil, thyme, and rosemary. I planted them in the narrow garden behind the house, pressing each root into the soil with deliberate care. The rosemary, in particular, felt symbolic. It had once grown wild in the yard of my old house, its scent mingling with every Sunday roast I made for my family. Planting it again was not about clinging to what was lost. It was about creating something new, something rooted in peace rather than fear. Kneeling in the dirt, I whispered to the sprigs as I covered their roots, "Grow strong, grow steady." It was as much a prayer for myself as for them. Life settled into a rhythm. Morning walks with Marisol, afternoons at the support group, evenings tending the herbs or reading by the window. The silence in my new home was no longer sharp, no longer filled with suspicion. It was gentle, like a quilt wrapped around tired shoulders. One evening, as I poured hot water into the chipped cup, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window. For the first time in years, I did not see a woman defined by survival alone. I saw someone beginning again. I lifted the cup, inhaled the steam, and whispered the words I once told my daughter, "Drink, and we'll get through the storm." Then I added softly, with no bitterness, only truth. "This time, I will get through it on my own." And as the scent of rosemary drifted in through the open window, I believed it. A year has passed since the courtroom lights, since the orange jumpsuit and the sound of the gavel that split my heart in two. Time has a way of softening the sharp edges of memory, though some wounds never fully close. Tonight I sit at my small desk with the window open, a journal before me. The ink flows slowly as I write the words I have carried inside all along. Silence is not surrender. Silence is the road home. When I first lost the life I thought I knew, I feared silence would devour me. But now, silence feels different. It has become the ground beneath my feet, steady, unshakable. It is not weakness. It is strength that no shouting can fracture. My days look nothing like they once did. The business suits, the ledgers, the ceaseless phone calls, they belong to another life. In this one, I share tea with neighbors in my kitchen, the scent of rosemary drifting through the open back door. I attend meetings at the support group, where stories mingle like threads in a quilt, each one holding another person together. This afternoon, we gathered in Marisol's yard, a small circle of chairs under the sycamore tree. Steam rose from mugs of tea, laughter rose from tired but healing throats. A man who once could barely speak about his son's betrayal told a joke that made us all bend with laughter. For the first time in months, I felt my ribs ache not from grief, but from joy. Marisol leaned close, her eyes shining as she studied my face. "You look different, Quinn," she said softly. "You look free." The words settled inside me like warm bread. Free. I had not thought of myself that way, but she was right. The shackles of guilt, the invisible chains of denial had fallen away. My daughter's choices no longer dictated who I was. When evening came, I walked home slowly, the sky painted in soft shades of lavender. My house glowed gently against the darkening street, a place that once felt foreign, now carrying the rhythm of safety. On the porch, I turned on the light, letting it spill across the steps. Inside, I set out 2 cups of tea. One for me, one for whoever might need it. Perhaps no one would come. Perhaps the second cup would remain untouched. But setting it down mattered. It was my way of saying the door is not closed to kindness, even after betrayal. I sat in the quiet, sipping slowly, the chipped cup warm in my hands. I thought of storms, the ones that once terrified my daughter, the ones that nearly ended me, and I thought of what I had written in my journal. Silence is the road home. Now I want to leave you with this thought, whoever you are, wherever you are listening. Do you think I was wrong Was I too harsh, too silent, too strong? Or was I simply doing what any mother must when love turns into danger? If you have ever endured something similar, I invite you to share your story in the comments below. Maybe your storm looked different. Maybe your betrayal wore another face. But perhaps together, we can learn that storms do not last forever. Perhaps together, we can make it through the rain.